Pickleball Diaries presents Cling on the Court with your host, Lily Brown. Let's go!
Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Cling on the Court. Let's cracking some pickleball code. Hi, Jeff. It's always a pleasure to see you. How are you?
Good. Thanks for having me back, Lily. Pleasure to be here as always.
Thank you. Always. Come back anytime. And last time we talked about the decision making. And today, I think let's cracking some code of how to train our smart decisions on the court. And is that trainable?
Yeah, it's everything is trainable. Yeah.
So what do you first let's see, what do you see the common mistakes of the poor decision making on
Yeah.
this?
I think there's some common mistakes we see at all levels of play. But some of the common mistakes we see are sometimes being impatient and attacking balls that maybe aren't the optimal balls to attack, or it's the wrong time to attack. So examples of that could be, maybe on a third shot, for instance, maybe the ball comes really sort of low and it's kind of awkward, and we choose to try to attack it aggressively from a really low contact point. It's hard to make that shot, especially if we're not really well set up to hit it. But also, if we attack from low, sometimes it makes the ball go up. Well, it does make the ball go up, which creates an opportunity for the net team to hit down on the ball. So sometimes being too aggressive on the wrong ball on a third shot can lead to either more mistakes or attacking opportunities for the net team. Some other common examples would be at the kitchen, people trying to speed up off the bounce, again, maybe at the wrong time. And wrong time could be because the ball is so low. So it's A, hard to execute, B, hard to be effective because you're sending the ball up over the net, which leads to another attacking opportunity for the net team with a high contact above the net. There could be sometimes one thing I see too is on fourth shots. So like fourth shot decision making can be really challenging. So you've just made a return, you've come to the net or to the non-volley zone, and the serving team hits some sort of third shot at you, and it could be a drive, a drop, or somewhere in between. And those shots come at different heights, different speeds, different directions. And a lot of times we'll see like the ball gets driven at a player at the non-volley zone, and on their fourth shot, they go for a really aggressive swing and aggressive volley. But when the ball's coming really fast at you, you don't have time to make big swings. So you usually want to have the idea of sort of just countering or meeting the ball with like a very compact preparation and a very simple movement to hopefully time the ball well. So a lot of times I see big swings happening on fourth shot, what should be counter punching situations or almost defensive blocking type of shots. And that can sometimes appear as a technical error. So it's like, oh, don't swing at that ball, right? Like that's too big a swing. But really it's a tactical or decision-making mistake. So if we just address the decision, often players will correct their own technique if we make them more aware that it was the wrong choice of shot. So less about the technique and more about just, hey, be smarter. That ball's coming fast at you. You don't have time for a big swing. So you need to recognize that you're under pressure and choose a different type of shot that's more about sort of neutralizing versus aggressively attacking when you're being attacked. So that would be another common example. Another example I see sometimes is when players are dinking at the kitchen. So all four players are at the non-volley zone, and there actually isn't a chance to attack. So there's been a series of dinks where there's been 3 or 4 effective neutralizing dinks that stay low over the net and are difficult to attack. And then all of a sudden you get a ball that's attackable, maybe not super obvious, so it's not really, really high above the net, but maybe it's just above the net, and the person doesn't recognize that it was a chance to attack. So they maybe back up and let it bounce and they play another dink, or maybe they hit like a really soft volley because they didn't realize they could actually increase the tempo and be more aggressive. And so they missed the opportunity to take the offense. So those would be some examples, like common examples of decision-making errors. I think one other one, this is related to recovery and court positioning, but often one mistake that I see people make is they've sent a ball that's too high above the net. So it could be a third shot drop, or maybe even like a reset fifth shot from somewhere around the transition zone, not reading the play correctly. So maybe not recognizing that the opponents are about to attack and they mistakenly move forward because they think they should go to the non-volley zone. But if you go to the non-volley zone on a ball that you've given really high to your opponents, they may smack it at you and you have very little time to react. So that's an example of like a decision-making mistake related to where you think you should position yourself. So recognizing the type of ball that you've sent to your opponents and then making a decision of where to recover based on the quality or effectiveness of that shot. So those are some common decision-making examples or challenges that players might face on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, so I like what you said, like all these decisions, when we make the onside in the game decisions, actually, these are the decisions we can train off the court, like off the game. And like, do you have any suggestions? Like, how can we train them like a muscle memory, but it becomes a muscle memory in the brain for the decision-making memories?
Well, yeah, you could train decision-making skills off court with some visualization or something like that. But ultimately, you need to train these with a ball, with opponents, in the most realistic settings that you can, if possible, because your decisions are based on so many variables that you need to set up situations that recreate realistic situations that you're going to face in competition. And if you don't train common situations or train decision-making skills in a variety of situations, you can't expect to have these skills and to have automatic decision-making skills because if it's you can't master what you don't train. So the best way to train decision-making is with either a partner one-on-one or with a group of players. Um, so you had mentioned training them off court. You could do some visualization of like, picturing yourself in different situations and picture yourself receiving different types of shots from different parts of the court and how you might respond to those. But ultimately, one of the major influencing factors for decision making is the ball received. So perceiving that oncoming ball and quickly making a decision of what shot to hit is the best way to train it. And so you should set up situations that create game scenarios and then make sure you're try to be aware of like what are the possible shots I could hit in this situation or when me and my opponents are in these court positions and then try to recognize what the appropriate responses might be and how to train those responses. So a really simple example could be, cross-court dinking is a fairly common situation for intermediate and advanced players. So you might train cross-court dinking and train your ability to recognize when your opponent pops the ball up above the net and train your response to attack at the right time and to train recognizing that the opportunity is there, but also recognizing it quickly. So making the decision and making it quickly. Another situation might be, return of serve. So, or receiving a return of serve as the serving team, recognizing what type of return or the quality of the return that you've just received and what type of third shot you might hit. So recognizing when the ball comes short and sits up for you that you should, if you have the skills, or at least try to develop the skill of recognizing that it's a short, weak return, move forward, take the ball a little earlier, level it out and increase speed to pressure your opponents at the net. That's another example. You could also train your defensive skills. So, recognizing when you've popped the ball up that even before your opponents hit it, like I've got to be in a defensive mindset and I'm going to do something that resembles a blocking technique or a blocking intention just to get the ball back. Those are some common examples. Again, fourth shots, like have your partner at the baseline sending you different types of shots from the baseline that sort of resemble a third shot scenario. And you can have the idea of like, okay, if it's above the net, I'm going to be more aggressive and hit the ball with more speed. If it's below the net and more challenging, I'm going to hit the ball softer and maybe even short to draw the opponent in. So you just need to be aware of what are what are the potential shots you might receive, and then what are the potential responses, and then work on making the right response or what you think is the optimal response, and then try to execute that response. And again, the keys with decision making are make the decision, but make it quickly. The sooner you recognize what shot you're going to hit, the more focused on the execution you can be, or usually the more calm you'll be when you're executing the shot because you know exactly what you're doing. Indecisiveness usually leads to poor execution, right? If we kind of don't recognize what shot we're going to hit till the last second, we may have to play safer, which means our shot is less effective, or we're just a little bit uncertain of what shot we're hitting, and it leads to, tension, lack of coordination, or just sort of like some sort of shot that we don't even know really what we were trying to do because we were indecisive, and that leads to more mistakes or lack of effectiveness. So,
Yeah, I think you just mentioned that a often common mistake occurred among us is you made a decision of which shot you want to hit, and then suddenly you see on the other side the player is moving, and you see an opening. It's like, oh, okay, I can send it to the opening part, but you already commit. Once you commit, you have to commit, right?
yeah, and again, this is why it's important to train situations that are as realistic as possible because the position of your opponents, and that includes the person who's not involved in sending the ball to you, but their partner,
Yeah.
where they're moving, how they're moving, their ability to poach and things like that can influence your shot selection. So that's why it's important to train in a sort of game-based way. It's also really, that's why it's important to train with a score, right? So like when we're drilling, we should be add competing elements where we keep score. So there's a consequence to missing, or there's a consequence to like your opponent imposing themselves on you, because the score influences how you feel, right? In an ideal world, we don't let the score influence our decision making, but when there's a score, that's an outcome, and we all want to win, right? It's only normal that we want to try to perform our best and try to win points. And the score can influence our emotions, and our emotions can influence our shot selection. For instance, if you're drilling with a partner and you're down, 7-0, and you're playing a game up to 11, like some sort of game, it doesn't matter what it is, you may get impatient or frustrated that you're losing, and you start to take more risk. And maybe that pays off, or maybe it backfires and you start making more mistakes, right? Or maybe you're up 7-0, and all of a sudden you're like, okay, I'm up. I'm going to protect this lead. I'm not going to play too aggressive. And you start playing passive, and maybe you stop attacking balls that you should be attacking. And all of a sudden you're letting your opponent back into the play. So this is why competing is important. Like the more we compete, the better we get at competing, right? Competing is a skill. So our ability to stay focused, our ability to stay calm, our ability to manage our emotions during competition, because all those things influence our decision-making skills. So the more we compete, the better we get at managing the ebbs and flows of the score, the better we get at managing our emotions, or even when we start to get fatigued physically, that can often lead to mental fatigue. And then we start playing more impatient or more passive. It depends on the person. But that's why scoring and competing and putting skills and situations into realistic settings where you're keeping score is so important because it emulates real play. And the more we emulate real play, the more realistic it is, and the better, in theory, our decision making should get if we have more consequences when we're training.
Yes. So I think you also mentioned a interesting topic is, of course, in ideal world, we can set up all the scenario or the game, finding perfect playmates to drill,
Yeah.
but we all have our real life, real job, unfortunately.
Yeah.
So how can we use a rec play as training ourselves for the decision making, and like especially the rec play, the level of players could be different, and you might playing with a partner you don't really know how to play, you don't often play together, but you want to say, okay, these are the 2 hours I want to train for myself. Like,
Yeah.
how do we do that?
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, goal like doing little sort of mini goal setting for rec games is really a smart way to help yourself develop your game and make improvements in your game. So one thing you can do with your partner when you're playing rec games is like, okay, be aware of who's on the other side and what their strengths and weaknesses are, and that might influence your game plan and overall strategy, which is in a sense a form of decision making, right? If
Yeah.
you're when you have a game plan, you're usually saying, okay, we're going to do a little more of this type of shot because we think it's going to be effective against those opponents. That is a form of decision making, right? Or it'll that your game plan influences your decision making. You might hit a particular shot more frequently against certain opponents. But then as an individual, if you're aware of some elements of your game that you need to work on in terms of particular shots. So maybe you're someone who's really consistent, but you're not really a threat. Like maybe you don't have as much of an offensive game. And even when you play on the offense, you're not effective. So when you go into rec play, you may say, you know what? I'm going to try to be really keenly aware of whenever I get an easier ball, I'm going to try to be more aggressive today. So on my third shot, I might drive more, especially when the return comes short and easy. I'm really going to try and work on my drive. I've been dropping for a long time, but I need to find ways to pressure my opponent. So I'm going to drive a little bit more today. That's an example of decision making. Again, it should be related to the type of ball you receive. Um, Conversely, the flip side of that would be, okay, I've been playing a little bit reckless. I've been working on my aggressive game because I'm trying to add some tools to my game. So I've been like speeding up a lot from the kitchen. I've been flicking balls from below the net in an effort to develop some of these more threatening shots or more surprise shots. But maybe become too aggressive and I'm bordering on being reckless and careless. And I'm starting to make too many unforced errors because I'm being too aggressive too often on the wrong ball. So you might go into the game on a particular day and say, I'm going to be a little bit more patient and I'm going to play like a little softer and slower on average. And I'm still going to attack, but I'm going to make sure I'm really selective about attacking on the right ball. And if you've been training your aggressive shots, say over the past 3 to 4 weeks, now if you attack at the right time, those aggressive shots will probably be really good because you've been working on being more aggressive over the past little while, right? And these are examples of how you can do mini goal setting for yourself, and also how you can sort of think tactically in terms of shot selection and how that fits into your overall development as a player. And this goes for any level, right? Yeah. Anyways, I hope that was
That's
helpful.
great.
Yeah.
Yeah, I find like these kind of like a goal setting really helps and also reduce the frustration when you walk into the rec game, like rather than thinking, oh, I just want to win, but you need to win on your own progress rather than just one game, especially in the rec game, right?
Yeah, and like the desire to win, like we all have that. So we should really like, and that is such an obvious goal that if we're focused on winning, that's an outcome. So we should really be focused on the process. So it's if we have a good process and we can implement that process, it optimizes or maximizes the chances of achieving the outcome of winning. So myself, I'm a very process-oriented person. Um, so I like to win for sure, but I find if I'm too outcome oriented, that I don't perform as well. So I really try and find ways to help myself stay in the moment so that I make better decisions and make better shots. And hopefully that will lead me to having a better chance of winning a match. But yeah, we should always be thinking in terms of like, how can I perform at my best, which is more of like a performance or process objective versus an outcome objective of, I want to win. Like, yeah, obviously we all want to win, but how are you going to make that happen, right? And
Yeah.
this is why competing and playing lots of rec games or when you're drilling using scoring is because scoring and the desire to win influences how we feel when it's not happening, right? We experience all sorts of emotions and feelings when we're competing, and the ability to manage those emotions in a healthy way and to stay in a process mindset that takes time, and it's a skill that can only be developed over time. Emotions can negatively or positive, our emotional state can negatively or positively influence our shot selection. Happens to me all the time. Like, if I'm playing a really good team and they're just not giving us any unforced errors, and they're just like, you feel like there's no way to break them, all of a sudden you start playing way more aggressive. And maybe that might actually be a smart thing to do, but you might be being aggressive on the wrong ball. And then you start paying the price, making more unforced errors or attacking at the wrong time, and it totally backfires. And that's related to your emotional state, or it could even be related to your ego. You might be like, oh, I should be able to crush these guys. Like, like I think I'm better than them. And then when things aren't going your way and they're beating you or they're leading in the score, your ego doesn't like that. You don't like that. And so you start doing things that are maybe out of your comfort zone that only lead to a snowball effect of actually getting worse or performing even worse than you were before. And so again, this is why competing's a skill, because it brings about different emotions, and it tests your ability to stay in the moment, keep a process-oriented mindset so that you can perform at your best, because all those nuances of competing affect decision making. So yeah, I sort of went on a tangent there, but
Oh, it's great.
the main message is decision making is important, and there's a lot of things that affect decision making, including our emotional state. And that's why it's important to compete. If we want to be better at competing and performing in tournaments, we have to compete often to develop those skills and develop the ability to be a good competitor. And we can define what a good competitor is. It's someone who can stay in the moment, can find ways to perform at their best, to try and get into their flow state and not overthink, and that comes from competing a lot and feeling all the things that come with competing. And it also comes from training and developing skills and training with purpose, which is sort of what we're talking about today with decision making.
Yeah. So thank you. Like, help us to get into the elite mind of thinking, the pro level decision making process. So like you been competing at the top level in Canada, also training top athletes in Canada. And so from your experience, what sets the elite players apart, like in their decision makings?
Yeah, so with the elite players, so I'd say the best players, and people who are listening to this podcast may know a lot of sort of the top Canadian players because they see them in different tournaments. But if we look at top pro players, whether it's in Canada or the US, um, one of the things we see that's common is confidence, right? And their ability to stay cool and manage their emotions, and to trust in themselves. And again, that comes from years of competing. And a lot of the top pros, before they even got into pickleball, may have come from different sports backgrounds. It could be tennis, badminton, squash, or other sports. And that is a huge advantage, because if you've competed a lot, again, you know how to manage winning, losing, momentum changes, the emotions, the physical fatigue, the potential external disruptions to your focus, like wind, crowd noise, all those things. So top players psychologically have the ability to stay engaged and stay in the moment and stay process oriented, and to believe in themselves, even with all those other things going on. And as it relates to decision making, that allows them to stay sort of clear minded and stay in the zone more often, and perform and make good decisions and execute those decisions with a high level of consistency and effectiveness. The other thing that pros do when it comes to decision making is the reason they make good decisions on the whole, even of course, even they make poor decisions sometimes, is because they've trained it. So pros, you can't be a pro at anything unless you've practiced extensively and practiced with intentionality and practiced with purpose. And this is why some tennis players like that come over to, say, the PPA, or have some players that have a rackets background of any sort, they have an advantage when it comes to decision making, because they've already played a sport where there's an oncoming ball coming towards them, and they have to make a choice of what shot they're going to respond with. And the things like when we talk about the ball that you're receiving, There's height, speed, spin, depth, direction. Those things are all things that pro players observe really quickly. They perceive the ball and make a choice. And if you come from a previous rackets background, you have a bit of an advantage because you understand the factors that influence decision making, such as the oncoming ball. So with pros, they've made the decision making process and shot selection process very automatic through repetition and training with specificity and having countless numbers of games and tournaments under their belts. And so they've gotten good at getting to that stage of being unconsciously competent, which we talked about in the last episode. So they don't even need to think about what they're doing, and they still are able to do it. They're just sort of focused on the ball, and their responses in any given situation are automatic. So they've reached closer to a level of mastery compared to, say, like an intermediate player. So they've just mastered the decision-making skills to the point where their responses to given situations are automated or automatic. And that's really what sets them apart.
Yeah, I think you also touched upon a great training of like we can train our psychological mind, our emotion, which is the part we probably often like overlook. So, and I'm so guilty of myself because I don't like to play outside. I don't like the wind. I don't like the sun. My friends all know that. And but like I do find that's the thing, like when external elements affect the ball, like I start to hold a negative feeling, which is not good, which is like affecting my focus. And from what you said, I need to change my mindset and take it as a training process. And part of is overcoming the emotion, the negative emotion, and take it as a challenge and practice my focus.
Yes, this is great. And like how we perceive anything, so how we perceive a situation or how we perceive something like wind will influence how we feel about it, right? So if we look at the wind and we're like, oh my God, I hate this wind. I hate playing in the wind. That's a pretty negative statement, right? That's negative self-talk. And that's going to lead to like a more negative or less productive emotional state. And
Yeah.
if we're in a less productive emotional state, or we're a little bit more negative, or we're frustrated because of the wind, which we cannot change, the wind is the wind, we can't change anything about it. It will lead often to either lack of effort physically, poor concentration, which leads to poor decision making. It could lead to impatience, like we're frustrated, like, I'm just going to try and end this point as quickly as possible. So you make more mistakes. So, how we perceive different potential distractions or external factors influences how we feel, and how we feel influences our ability to perform. And so, the most of the time, the best players in the world manage those external factors or potential distractions. They manage those really well. And on average, the responses to things that a lot of us might perceive or feel to be negative and cause us to be more distracted or more negative, most of the time, professionals are better at managing their sort of perception of these things and how they feel about them. Because again, you can't change what you can't change. So it's always best to focus on what you can control. So be aware of the wind, but try to turn it into a bit more of a positive thing where it's like, okay, the wind's blowing this way. So I know I need to do more of this with the ball. I need to hit the ball more in this direction, or I need to hit it slower or faster. That would be a more productive response. So, anyways, as that relates to decision making, there's a lot of things that can throw off our ability to be good at shot selection. And one of those things is how we carry ourselves emotionally, and making sure that we have a process-oriented mindset so that we can stay in the present and then make better decisions because we're more present and less distracted by these other things that might distract us.
Yeah, so during the like the high level play, and how do you use the partner communication to help the decision making?
Yeah, well, if you're communicating with your partner, you're usually communicating about things that you think will benefit you and your partner as a team. So it could be court positioning, could be trying to send more of a particular shot. Like, for instance, okay, let's try and hit more shots to this partner on the other side. So maybe you pick on a player you perceive to be weaker. Um, or maybe it's like, okay, we're being too aggressive. Let's slow down and be a little more patient. Those are things that influence your decision making and may improve your decision making or make it easier to focus, right? So when you have a plan, so usually when you're communicating with your partner, it's related to an overall plan most of the time, or you're correcting something related to tactics and strategy. So that's an example of something that's process oriented that helps keep you in the present. And sometimes when you have something that's process oriented, it eliminates other potential variables or distractors that can take away from your shot selection. So it can become easier to execute shots when you're communicating well and having more of a plan. It just it eliminates some variables and makes it easier to focus. And the more focused we are, obviously, the better we're going to execute our shots in terms of consistency, but also the quality of the shot that we're hitting.
Yeah, so with that, is there any pre-planned sequence we can work on for our decision making, drilling on the court, off the court? Is there anything you can suggest?
Yeah, so I think you're kind of referencing something called like patterns or patterns of play. So
Yeah.
often when we play, we see these common sequences of shots and we see them multiple times, and that's what we refer to as patterns. So there's the patterns of the actual combined shots, individual shots that combine to form a pattern. Um, and so if we train our ability to hit a sequence of shots or to perform a pattern, that can benefit us because it makes us more familiar with the likely responses or likely types of shots we might receive and what the best or optimal response might be. So by training patterns, sometimes it can make our decision making more automatic. And then the flip side of that is being aware of patterns from your opponents. So you might start to pick up on tactical patterns from your opponent. So it's like when we hit this, they often respond with this. And then that might influence your next shot. So you'd be like, okay, let's keep doing that because it's benefiting us. It's allowing us to then hit this type of shot and cause them trouble. Or it could be, hey, I've noticed every time we hit this type of shot, they're responding with this, and it's actually detrimental to us. They're imposing on us and pressuring us. We need to stop giving them that ball. So training patterns of play can just make you more familiar with receiving types of shots and responding with the most optimal shot. The challenge when you do pattern training is you should often train like the setup shot, and sometimes the type of ball you get back might be different than what you expect. So that's where decision making comes in. It's like, okay, I think we're most likely to get this type of shot, but it's possible I receive another type of shot, so I need to change my response.
Yeah.
But that's, if you take it a step back, you could also say, well, what type of ball would I like to get when I get to the non-volley zone for my fourth shot? So what type of return do I want to hit to try and create an easier fourth shot for me? Okay, well, I'm going to try and return aggressive and deep to the weaker player in an effort to try and get like a weak response or a high ball over the net where I can stay on the offense. So you could train that pattern with a friend or a coach where it's like, okay, really work on your aggressive return and an aggressive fourth shot when the ball's above the net. Then you could also train like an aggressive return, but what happens if the third shot is low and effective? Okay, I need to train a different response. So you train those patterns individually, and then maybe you train it where you open it up and you have to make a decision of what shot you're going to hit on the fourth shot. So it's good to train patterns, but then add some variables where it's like the pattern starts with this shot, but I could get another type of shot, and what's the best response?
I
So
really like what you said. So basically we should train the patterns, but at the same time, we always train our decision-making skills because we don't want to predetermine the shot we want to do before it even happens. So
yeah, we want to by training, we just become familiar with certain types of situations or patterns.
Yeah.
But yes, we always have to respond on the variables of the ball, maybe our opponent's positioning, our positioning, where we are in the court, our own strengths and weaknesses. But training patterns is just a way to sort of automate your responses when you get certain types of shots. So pattern training or training a sequence of shots is a really good way to create that automated, sort of unconscious, competent ability so that your responses become automatic. So when you get into competition, those skills are there and those shots are there. And again, that's why technique is absolutely critical. You have to have good technique to execute a variety of shots. But that's why we also want to make sure we have a tactical and situational emphasis on our training so that we become very familiar with where we are in the court, the types of balls we could receive, and try to automate our responses so we make the best choice more often, so that we can be a more effective player.
I hope we can all reach the unconscious competence.
Yeah, yeah.
Thank you. Oh, thank you so much. And I think it's the time of the ending time again. Unfortunately, and this time just flies by so quickly. Thank you so much for sharing your ocean of knowledge with us again. And listeners out there, if you like this podcast, please click the like button and subscribe on YouTube and all sorts of podcast platforms, on Spotify and iPhone, Apple, and Google. I hope to see everyone next week again, and have a great week. Thank you. Bye.
Thanks, Lily. Thanks for having me. Take care.
You too.